Right here and welcome our next guest, Mr. Edward Ted Kaufman. Mr. Kaufman is the former U.S. Senator from Delaware. Laura Jewett, the National Democratic Institute's Regional Director for European and Asia region. Mr. Kaufman and Ms. Laura will update us, will brief us on the NDI election observation mission of Ukraine, on the key outcomes that the mission has done after 1 week being in Ukraine. And without any further ado, I welcome our honored speakers here.
Thank you, Elena. We're very glad to be here at the Crisis Media Center. And thanks to you all for joining us. As Elena said, I'm Laura Jewett. I'm NDI's Director for Eurasia in Washington, D.C. And I'm here with a pre-election assessment mission of the National Democratic Institute. Our purpose was to accurately and impartially assess electoral preparations in advance of the October 26 elections, to review the broader political environment, to examine any factors that could affect the integrity of the electoral process, to offer recommendations to support peaceful, credible elections and public confidence in the process. And we have been most focused on those issues that can be addressed before the elections. The work of this delegation is a demonstration of NDI's commitment to supporting Ukraine's democratic development. These elections, of course, are important because a credible process is necessary to enable the new government to pursue reforms and find an acceptable solution to the conflict. Our delegation consists of Ted Kaufman, former U.S. Senator from Delaware and a member of the NDI Board of Directors, Robert Adams, to my right, an international elections and democratization expert, to my far left, Maria Babic, who is an international elections expert, and to my far right, Mary O'Hagan, whom I'm pleased to introduce as NDI's new Senior Director for NDI in Ukraine. And you will hear from my colleagues momentarily. The delegation's findings are based on meetings that the delegation had in Kyiv, Dnipropetrovsk, and Lviv, with a broad spectrum of candidates, parties, and campaigns, representatives of the national and oblast governments, the presidential administration, representatives of the Central Election Commission and district election commissions, citizen monitoring groups and other civic organizations, members of parliament, journalists, and the international and diplomatic community. A copy of our report with findings will be available at the end of this conference. Also, I'd like to note that NDI is coordinating closely with other organizations concerned with these elections, including APORA, CVU, NMO, IRI, IFES, and of course OSCE and ODIHR, who have launched their long-term observation mission today, if I'm not mistaken. In addition, NDI will deploy a delegation and issue a report following Election Day in October. We'd like to thank the U.S. Agency for International Development for supporting this activity and NDI's other projects in Ukraine. And we would like to offer our particular gratitude to all of those who made time to meet with the delegation and offer their views. I will now turn to Senator Kaufman.
Thank you, Laura, and good afternoon. As the campaign gets underway, there are two serious structural challenges that must be met and that cannot at this point be changed. First, and by far most important, is the external aggression in the East. The second is the need for reforms in the legal framework for elections. That being said, we believe that these challenges can be compensated for if government officials, election administrators, parties and candidates, law enforcement authorities, the media, and civil society demonstrate political will and are proactive at identifying and addressing any potential problems. The delegation was impressed that most people who talked to us had a relatively high level of confidence in the work of the Central Election Commission and the role of the central government. We did, however, hear many predictions of problems at the local level, especially in single mandate races, vote buying, and abuse of local administrative resources. Now, Maria Babic will talk about some of the other findings.
Notwithstanding the already mentioned challenges, the delegation is also encouraged to see some positive signs and developments that we hope are broadening the civic participation in the democratic process and ensuring or will ensure the higher integrity of the process. First of all, we were happy to see that the Euromaidan movement has not died away, but it has channeled its energy into more sustainable forms of political organizing and government. First of all, there are new parties that will be contesting these elections that emerged from the Euromaidan movement and that espouse Euromaidan ideas. But there are also new faces and new entrants into politics that have been nominated and will be contesting these elections. In addition, based on the information so far, we are seeing early signs that women may play a larger role in these elections, and hopefully also that the representation of women could be a step forward compared to the current parliament. In addition, these elections will offer a broad spectrum of choices to the electorate and are expected to be genuinely contested. Furthermore, Ukrainian civil society organizations are actively engaged in the election process, either as observers, as advocates of the reform, or voter education activists. We do hope they will remain energized, constructive, and vigilant throughout the process. And last but not least, the government and the authorities and election administration have made pledges to hold a democratic and transparent electoral process, and Ukrainians do seem more determined than ever to realize their democratic aspirations.
In the statement that you will receive at the end of this meeting, there are a number of recommendations. These have been divided into longer-term recommendations regarding the future elections in Ukraine and the ones regarding which can be implemented in the period leading up to these parliamentary elections. I'm just going to give you some of the indications of some of the priority recommendations from our statement. With regard to the legal framework, our priority recommendation is for the effective and efficient implementation of the framework that is in place at the moment. We encourage officials to take a proactive approach to making these elections work. Specifically, our recommendations are that the CEC should make full use of its regulatory powers to address gaps or provide clarity on issues related to the legal framework. We also recommend that election commissioners and law enforcement agencies should transparently and objectively investigate and penalise all reports of election law violations to the full extent of the law. Obviously, there are longer-term issues. We recommend that the new Parliament should undertake reform of the legal framework for elections as a matter of urgent priority, and it should be completed at least 1 year before the next election. This process should be transparent and consultative and should yield to a consensus framework which minimises the need for future revisions and reduces the uncertainty before future elections. Renewed consideration should be given to adopting a unified election code that would govern elections at all levels. In relation to enfranchisement and electoral security, we recommend that before these parliamentary elections, election authorities should clarify voting plans and procedures in Donetsk and Luhansk as quickly as possible, giving priority consideration to the security of participants and the integrity of the process. We recommend that the CEC establish a date prior to the deadline for distribution of ballots for making its final determination on whether polling centres will operate. This information should be conveyed to candidates, parties, election workers, election monitors, media and voters as quickly and as early as possible. The CEC should adopt as soon as possible a resolution to clarify and simplify the procedures for internally displaced persons and residents of the occupied territories of Donetsk and Luhansk to temporarily change their voting location. We also made a series of recommendations which, in synthesis, encourage law enforcement and election authorities to coordinate closely in planning for these elections in order to ensure that the security environment is safe and the integrity of the process. The deterrent of election fraud is a priority. In relation to the electoral administration, we recognise the huge challenges of training and coordinating the number of people involved, especially the commissioners, given the tradition of frequent and last-minute substitution. Specifically, we recommend that election administrators should receive comprehensive, consistent guidelines and training so that they may fulfill their responsibilities competently and fairly. And we ask the political parties to cooperate fully in this important training program. With regard to campaigns and candidates, we recommend that parties should take full responsibility for the conduct of their activists and their candidates, both those on party lists and in single-member constituencies, in order to ensure compliance both with the letter and the spirit of the law. Parties should engage the public through electoral appeals based on issues important to citizens and avoid inflammatory or intolerant rhetoric. With regard to the media environment, we recommend that the media should provide fair coverage to all political parties, candidates and campaigns, focusing on issues important to voters, and should avoid inflammatory language, sensationalism and misinformation. It is important that media label any advertising material for which payment has been made accurately as advertising. With regard to women's participation, in our findings, we were encouraged to see that some parties are making concerted efforts to put more women in their lists. With in the period remaining for filling the candidacies for single-member zones, we recommend that parties should recruit and nominate more women as candidates in electorates where their parties are competitive. And overall, that parties and candidates should consult with women voters on the issues important to them and reflect those considerations in their policy agendas and platforms. It is regrettable that there is no change in the legal framework with regard to campaign financing. We therefore highlight the importance of voluntary disclosure. We recommend, in keeping with the Chesno Movement's Honest Parliament 2014 campaign, that political parties should disclose party financial reports for 2013, publish declarations on candidate incomes, publish candidate biographies, and disclose detailed financial reports on electoral funding and spending. And finally, on election observation, we recommend that all international and domestic observers should operate in accordance with the Declaration of Principles for International Election Observation and the Declaration of Global Principles for Non-Partisan Election Observation and Monitoring by Citizen Organizations. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. We'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much. Do we have any questions, colleagues? Well, I have a question actually to Mr. Kaufman. In your summary, in your report, you underlined that Ukraine approaches parliamentary election with a series of democratic achievements. This was actually the statement that yesterday President Poroshenko made to the US Congress by saying that in Ukraine we don't have to build up the democracy because it's already here and we just need to defend it. At the same time, we have an increasing level of security threat despite the ceasefire agreement, and we have the election law that has not been adopted. So assuming these challenges, what should the government, what should the Ukrainians do to preserve this hardly earned democracy that you are speaking?
Well, I think we have to preserve the goodwill, and we have to preserve people going out and really trying to make the system work. And it's been encouraging when we've talked to the government authorities, the list that I went through before, that they do seem to be interested in doing this. They do want to have goodwill. They do want to do it the right way. And I think we just encourage that. Most of the people we talked to were optimistic about the elections, and especially coming off the presidential elections. So there are concerns. There are concerns about the aggression in the East. There are concerns about the lack of electoral reform. But we feel that if people engage in goodwill, actually go out and do their jobs at all levels, we will have a good election.
If I could just add to that, these elections should be looked at not only as a test of Ukraine's democracy, but also as potentially an engine for further democracy. And if they are well handled and constructively approached, they can help to move Ukraine further forward on its democratic trajectory.
Ms. Laura, how do you assess the recently adopted two bills that the Verkhovna Rada adopted on the giving more opportunities to the local governments in eastern Ukraine? How do you assess the impact, the potential implications of these bills on the upcoming elections?
You're referring to the special status legislation? Well, those are assessments that I think need to be made by the Ukrainian people, but it will be important for, if elections are to be held in those areas, to be sure that the conditions are in place for security for all participants and for a credible process. And it will be important whether those elections are held on October 26th or whether it's a matter of by-elections at a later date, that those conditions be met.
Thank you so much. Do we have any more questions? No questions? Let me remind that the summary of the key findings you can get here at the administration desk. And with this, I thank you so much, the representatives, the Mr. Kaufman, Ms. Laura, and the colleagues of the National Democratic Institutes for your findings. And just the last question for me, are you going to prepare another report after the elections and to highlight it?
Yes, we will. We will have a delegation here for the election, and we'll have a report afterward. We look forward to talking with you then.
Exactly. Then I'm looking forward to welcome you in Ukraine Crisis Media Center again. Thank you so much. Have a nice day. А наш наступний прес-брифінг вже через 5 хвилин. Дякую.